This time, we're exploring something that's been on a lot of people's minds, Gen Z's mental health. And we're going to be using Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, as our roadmap today.
That's a great one. Really gets to the heart of some big issues.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at what might be behind Gen Z's struggles, and most importantly, explore some potential solutions. We're going to skip the fluff today, get right into the good stuff.
Love it.
So Haidt starts off with his pretty thought-provoking analogy.
Oh, yeah.
He compares Gen Z to the first generation raised on Mars. Before you start picturing kids in spacesuits, he's really talking about this massive shift in what childhood even looks like these days.
Makes sense.
He calls it the great rewiring of childhood. And he pinpoints the late 1980s as this turning point. This is when we started to see the move from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood.
That is a huge shift.
Yeah, so instead of, building forts and playing tag outside,
Yeah.
kids are now glued to screens.
And that's had a big impact on their development, especially during those key adolescent years. And Haidt even says that, our traditional ideas of childhood and adolescence might need a rethink because puberty is starting earlier these days and there's more variation.
It's like the rules of the game have changed, but we haven't updated the playbook.
Yeah, exactly.
And just to be clear, this isn't just an American thing. Haidt's looking at global trends impacting Gen Z.
It's worldwide.
Okay, so let's get to the data. What's it telling us about this so-called anxious generation? Is it all doom and gloom?
Well, the statistics definitely paint a pretty serious picture. Depression among teens has been rising sharply since around 2012. You'll see some powerful visuals in Haidt's book that really highlight this, especially for girls. And what's even more concerning is that this isn't limited to a certain race or social class. It's affecting teens across the board.
Wow, so it's like this wave washing over a whole generation.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And the increase is mostly in what's called internalizing disorders. So we're talking about anxiety and depression, conditions where the distress is really felt inwardly.
Right, and that can lead to social withdrawal and isolation.
So it's not just about feeling sad, it's about feeling disconnected.
Exactly. And that's where Haidt's concept of smartphones and tablets as experience blockers comes in.
Interesting.
They might offer this virtual connection, but they're also preventing real-world experiences that are absolutely crucial for development.
So he's saying that kids are missing out on essential life lessons because they're glued to their devices.
Yeah, he makes a really strong case for that.
Okay, so let's break this down. How does he explain this experience blocking idea?
Well, think about the importance of free play for kids. Research shows it's not just fun and games, it's actually how mammals, including us humans, literally wire our brains for social and emotional skills.
Oh, wow. So it's like a boot camp for real-life interaction.
Exactly. You're navigating those complex social situations, you're resolving conflicts, dealing with setbacks, learning to cooperate, all through play.
That makes so much sense.
But when screens start dominating a child's time, they miss out on these opportunities.
Yeah.
It's the difference between learning to swim in a pool and watching videos of people swimming.
Oh, yeah. One is immersive and engaging. The other is just passive.
Right. And the data backs this up. As smartphone use increased, unstructured time with friends decreased.
Yeah. Why hang out when you can just text or snap?
Exactly. And Haidt also talks about this concept of attunement.
Attunement.
Yeah, it's that ability to really connect with others on an emotional level. It happens during those deep face-to-face conversations where you're reading each other's cues and responding in real time.
It's that feeling of truly understanding, being understood.
Exactly. Social media interactions, on the other hand, are mostly asynchronous and performative. You're curating an image, waiting for likes and comments, constantly comparing yourself to others. It's the opposite of that authentic connection.
So even though you might have hundreds of online friends, you could actually end up feeling more isolated and disconnected.
That's the paradox. And it hits especially hard during adolescence, when social connections are crucial for developing that sense of self.
And that's not even touching on the pressure to present this perfect online persona.
Oh, yeah, that can be incredibly intense.
Right, because even though video games can be engaging and even educational in some cases, they can pull kids away from those real-world interactions.
Absolutely. And Haidt dives into two learning biases, conformist and prestige bias, and how social media really exploits these.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So instead of primarily learning from their families and local communities, kids are bombarded with information and values from online influencers.
It's almost as if their worldview is being shaped by algorithms. instead of real-life experiences.
Yeah, it's a real concern. And this is all happening during a key window for cultural learning, between ages 9 and 15, which often coincides with puberty and the adoption of smartphones.
Wow, that's a lot to process during such a formative time.
It is. And we're seeing a generation that's less connected to their local communities, more influenced by online trends, and potentially missing out on those essential real-world experiences that build resilience.
Okay, this is all fascinating, but it also sounds pretty bleak. Is there any hope for this generation?
Oh, absolutely. But first, we need to understand the full picture, including the role of overprotection. You know, one thing Haidt points out is this contradiction almost. We're overprotecting kids in the real world, but then underprotecting them online.
That does seem kind of backwards. What do you mean?
Well, he uses this case of Deborah Harrell. She's this mom who let her 9-year-old daughter play unsupervised at a park and ended up facing criminal charges.
It's like we're so worried about stranger danger that we forget kids need some freedom to explore.
Exactly. So we're keeping them on a tight leash in the real world, but giving them free rein in this wild west of the internet.
Doesn't really make sense when you put it like that.
Haidt argues that it's actually doing them a disservice on both ends.
Interesting. How does he explain that?
He brings up this idea of discover mode versus defend mode in the brain.
Okay, I'm listening.
So think of discover mode as that state where a child's brain is open to exploration, curiosity, taking risks. It's all about learning and growing through experience.
Like a little explorer venturing out into the world.
Exactly.
Defend mode is like the opposite.
Yeah, defend mode kicks in when the brain senses a threat. It triggers anxiety and withdrawal that focus on self-preservation.
So overprotection basically keeps kids locked in defend mode.
You got it. They're missing out on those opportunities to navigate challenges and build that self-efficacy that comes from taking risks.
Haidt even uses this term anti-fragility.
He compares children to trees that need wind to grow strong. You shield a tree from the wind, it becomes weak and brittle. Overprotecting kids has a similar effect.
I like that analogy. It really drives the point home.
Right, and he contrasts those old school playgrounds with their inherent risks, the tall slides, the spinning merry-go-rounds, with these modern, sanitized play spaces. He argues that those older playgrounds, while seemingly more dangerous, actually helped kids develop resilience.
Because they were constantly testing their limits, learning to fall, and pushing themselves to overcome their fears.
Exactly, and they were doing it in a relatively safe environment. So by removing those risks, we've kind of inadvertently made childhood less challenging and ironically less safe in the long run.
It's like we've traded skinned knees for fragile psyches.
Yeah, that's a powerful way to put it.
And to make matters even more complex, puberty is this time of immense brain plasticity.
Huge changes happening in the brain.
Meaning it's being rewired based on experience.
Yeah, exactly. And those experiences are increasingly shaped by technology. So it's so crucial to find that sweet spot between challenge and support, allowing kids to take risks while still providing that nurturing environment.
That balance seems more important than ever.
Absolutely. And this is where Haidt really zeroes in on the smartphone as this game changer.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just another screen, it's this portal to a world of constant stimulation and distraction.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. What does he say about smartphones specifically?
He lays out what he calls the 4 foundational harms of a phone-based childhood.
Okay, hit me with them.
So first we have social deprivation. Smartphones are displacing those essential face-to-face interactions that are needed to develop social skills and emotional intelligence.
And this goes way beyond just ignoring your family at dinner, right?
Yeah, it's a fundamental shift in how kids interact with the world.
Okay, what's the second harm?
Second, we have sleep deprivation. Smartphones with their constant notifications and the allure of social media make it tough for teenagers who already have shifting sleep patterns to get the rest they need.
And lack of sleep can impact everything, from their grades to their mood to their health.
Exactly. It's a domino effect.
All right, number 3.
Third, we have attention fragmentation. Our brains aren't meant to juggle a constant stream of information and notifications.
It's like trying to read a book while someone's tapping you on the shoulder every few seconds.
Perfect analogy. And this can really damage executive function, making it harder to focus, plan, and resist impulses.
Wow, so smartphones are basically rewiring our brains
Huh.
to be more distractible.
It's a serious concern.
And the fourth harm?
The fourth harm is addiction.
That's a big one.
The tech industry has gotten incredibly good at using behavioral psychology to hook users. Those likes, comments, and notifications trigger dopamine release. which keeps us coming back for more.
It's like they're handing out digital slot machines to kids.
It's a scary thought. Haidt shares some pretty alarming stats about screen time. We're talking an average of 6 to 8 hours per day for teenagers.
That's more time than they spend sleeping.
It's a huge chunk of their waking hours.
No wonder there's so much concern about mental health.
And as we look at the gendered experiences, you'll see how these harms can manifest differently in girls and boys.
Let's talk about girls first. What makes them particularly vulnerable in this digital landscape?
Well, social media really taps into what's called communion strivings, that deep desire to connect with others and be part of a group.
So it's playing on that basic human need to belong.
Exactly. And research shows that girls tend to feel this need more strongly than boys.
That makes sense when you consider traditional gender roles and how girls are often socialized.
Right. So social media, with its emphasis on connection and sharing, can seem like a great way to fulfill these needs.
But like we've been talking about, those connections can be pretty shallow
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately unsatisfying.
Yeah, and they can actually worsen feelings of loneliness and anxiety, especially when you add in the constant social comparison.
It's tough to feel good about yourself when you're constantly bombarded with these images of other people's seemingly perfect lives.
And Haidt points out that this hits girls particularly hard because they're often judged more harshly on their appearance and social status.
It's like the pressure to be popular and attractive has been amplified tenfold by social media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This can create this vicious cycle of self-doubt, body image issues, and anxiety. And it's especially tough during puberty when girls are already going through so many changes.
It's almost as if social media is preying on those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about.
And it's not just about individual girls feeling bad about themselves, right? This can actually impact their social dynamics as a whole.
Right. Research shows that emotions can be contagious. Happiness can spread through social networks. But so can negative emotions like anxiety and depression.
So if one girl is feeling anxious, it can spread to her friends and then their friends, creating this kind of collective anxiety spiral.
Exactly. And this is all amplified by the constant social comparison and competition that social media encourages.
Sounds like a breeding ground for insecurity.
It's definitely a concern.
Okay, so we've talked about the girls. What about the boys? How is their experience different?
Well, Haidt suggests that while girls tend to internalize their distress, boys are more likely to externalize it or withdraw completely.
So instead of anxiety and depression, we might see more aggression, risk-taking behavior, or even just this general disengagement from school and social life.
Exactly. And he links this back to those agency strivings we talked about earlier. That desire to have control and make an impact on the world.
Which makes sense when you consider traditional gender roles.
Right. So Haidt argues that in a world where boys are constantly being told to be careful, follow the rules, avoid risk, video games offer this virtual space where they can experience that sense of agency and control.
They can be heroes, conquer challenges, be in charge.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly appealing, especially during adolescence, when they're trying to figure out who they are and what they're capable of.
But of course, there's a potential downside to this.
Oh, absolutely. Excessive gaming can lead to social isolation, sleep deprivation, even addiction, just like social media.
And it can also prevent them from developing those real-world social skills and coping mechanisms that are so important for a healthy, fulfilling life.
Exactly. It's all about balance.
And Haidt points out that boys might be especially susceptible to this because they're often exposed to video games before social media.
That's an interesting point.
So they've already developed those patterns of seeking agency and reward in the virtual world.
Right, which can make it even harder to transition to those complexities and nuances of real-world relationships.
It's like they're missing out on a crucial stage of social development.
Yeah, it's a valid concern.
Okay, so this has been pretty heavy stuff. Does Haidt offer any solutions? Or are we just left with this bleak outlook?
No, not at all. He actually ends on a hopeful note, emphasizing the importance of spirituality.
How does spirituality fit into all of this?
Well, Haidt suggests that a phone-based life can lead to spiritual degradation because it disconnects us from deeper sources of meaning and purpose.
So we need to find a way to unplug from the digital and plug back into something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. He talks about this concept of the sacred versus the profane. The sacred in this context are those experiences that transcend the self and connect us to something larger, whether that's nature, art, religion, or community.
And the profane is like the opposite.
Right, the profane is the realm of the everyday, the self-focused, the materialistic.
So social media, with its emphasis on self-promotion, and instant gratification
Yeah.
is pretty much the definition of the profane.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And overexposure to that can leave us feeling empty, disconnected, even nihilistic.
Exactly. We lose touch with those things that give life meaning and purpose.
So where do we go from here? What can we do to address this?
Well, that's where collective action comes in. Haidt acknowledges it's a complex problem, but he also believes that change is possible. He talks about the need for governments to step up and regulate the tech industry, especially when it comes to protecting children from the addictive designs of social media.
We need some guardrails on this digital playground.
Exactly. He also advocates for schools to become phone-free zones, allowing kids to engage in more unstructured play and face-to-face interaction.
Because, as we've discussed, play isn't just frivolous, it's essential for healthy development.
And finally, he emphasizes the role of parents in setting healthy limits on screen time, modeling balanced tech use, and creating opportunities for their kids to engage in real-world activities that foster connection, creativity, and purpose.
So it's a multi-pronged approach. Individuals, families, communities, and governments all working together. We've faced collective action problems before, and we've found solutions.
Think of the environmental movement, the fight for civil rights, the push for public safety measures. Those were all movements that required a collective shift in awareness, values, and behavior.
So maybe this is the next great challenge. Reclaiming childhood, fostering mental well-being, and finding a more balanced, fulfilling way to live in this digital age.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, it comes down to our choices, both individually and as a society.
Well, there you have it, folks. The key takeaway here is that we have the power to shape the future of childhood technology and mental well-being. So as you navigate your own digital life and interact with the young people in your world, remember there's more to life than screens, and those things are worth fighting for.